You are listening to Proof Text, a Glossa House podcast exploring scripture with Dr. T. Michael W. Halcomb and Dr. Fredrick J. Long. Welcome and enjoy.
Hello, welcome to Proof Text. I'm Michael Halcomb here with Dr. Fred Long, and this is a grammar point episode. So we're still talking about verbs. I think this is like part 16 where we're talking about verbs, and we've been on a little kick about diathesis, voice, and so we've covered voice in general and active voice, and in this episode I think we're going to talk about this thing called middle voice, which for you English speakers may be a very new concept to you. So Fred, what is middle voice in relation to perhaps English and Greek?
Wow, I'm kind of stuck on the fact that you said "I think." Does that somehow mean that I get us on tangents or something like that?
No, I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah,
I'm reading too much into that. Okay, so the diathesis messe, right? The middle voice. So the middle voice is when the subject's own involvement in the action of the verb or the resultant benefits is marked. It's marked. So the subject.
So what do you mean by marked, by the way?
Marked means that it's grammatically distinguished from other forms. Okay. So marking has to do with the presence or absence of some linguistic feature in the text. Now, with written text, we're dealing with what we can see written down. If we include live speech, we're going to have intonation, gesture, all kinds of body language. If I'm sitting like this or whatever. So middle voice is we use people are now using this idea of subject effectiveness. The subject of the action is involved in the outcomes of the action or involved in the action more than simply an active or in the benefits of that action. Well, obviously the subject in active voice is doing the action, but somehow with the middle voice, they are even more marked as involved or as benefiting that action.
So they're being affected.
They're being affected. They're being affected by it. So in Greek, we can see this most preeminently in what traditionally has been called deponent verbs. Deponent verbs it's a wrong label. Deponent, I think I call them middle formed verbs. And these verbs are verbs like praying, walking, and walking. So you can't even put those into anything other than, I am praying or I am walking. But when you think about the praying and the walking, the subject is really involved in that action. And in motoring myself from one destination to another, I'm taking myself somewhere. So erkome, I come or I go. Perevome, I journey or I go. Those are middle form verbs. And so it's interesting that prosevkome is praying is also middle formed. And so these middle form verbs somehow are marking the subject effectiveness in the action of the verb. So the middle voice in Greek is distinguished always from the active forms. The marking is different, so the endings are different. Now, in the present tense and the imperfect tense, the forms are exactly the same. But in the future and aorist, I should say the perfect tense and pluperfect. So the present, imperfect, perfect, and pluperfect, the forms of the middle and of the passive are the same. And we can talk about the passive voice next. But for the aorist and future, there's a splitting off of formations, at least as are learned for beginning Greeks. So the middle voice is marking somehow the subject effectiveness on a scale, and somehow they're receiving some kind of benefit, but it's been described in different ways. There's different categories. Grammarians will talk about the reflexive or reciprocal middle, where somehow the subject's action is reflected back or performed reciprocally reciprocally among members if it's a plural. So
Like I kiss. Yeah.
Yeah, Judas hanged himself. He did something to himself. There's also a middle of personal interest where, like, for example, in 2 Timothy, Paul says, 4:15, guard yourself against him. That's actually a command in the middle voice. Guard yourself. There's a permissive middle.
Yeah.
Why not rather let yourself be wronged? That's actually a middle formation. So you have grammarians have subcategorized these these nuances that seem to be possible when the middle voice is used. And I would only add to that the need for us to reconsider deponent verbs as not deponent, but rather as middle formed, because there is a degree of subject effectiveness in them. And I think it was Jonathan Pennington. He wrote a pretty significant article that really helped us move beyond the traditional understanding of grammar. And so, but people are not accepting of that or not aware of it, and so it's still being taught in certain ways. And so, those are my thoughts on that, Michael.
Right on. Well, thanks for sharing, Fred. And for you, listener, please do the same. Share the episode if you'd like. Hit subscribe, like, and we hope that you're enjoying the podcast and we'll continue listening. Until next time, we hope that helps.
Interested in growing your ancient language skills but not sure where to start? Glossa House can help. From illustrated readers and short stories to lexicons and grammars, Glossa House offers a variety of resources for beginning, intermediate, and experienced ancient language learners. Head to glossahouse.com today. Glossa House, language resources for the global community.